Hi everyone, and welcome to 8 Minute Equity, a video series from Ledgy, where we unpack an interesting equity topic in around 8 minutes. This time you join us for a conversation on share valuations. My name is Joe. I'm content and communications lead at Ledgy, and this time I'm delighted to be joined by Sue Tilstone and Lyndsay McGregor from Deloitte. Sue is a partner leading Deloitte's tax valuations group, of which Lyndsay is a director. They both have extensive experience advising businesses on complex valuations, including those which involve equity as a core consideration. Thank you both, Sue and Lyndsay, for joining us.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
And to kick us off with this edition, I'd like to talk about a common misconception about valuations, namely that businesses have a valuation which is objective, is set out in stone, and why do we think this view is still prevalent? To what extent is it accurate or inaccurate? And actually, Sue, what really differentiates a quality valuation from one that we might perceive as less robust?
You're absolutely right. It is a common misconception, and that you can take a one-size-fits-all approach to valuation, and it really couldn't be more wrong. Tax valuations in particular have distinct characteristics and must adhere to specific parameters that can vary based on jurisdiction and legal requirements. And tax authorities often have their own way of doing things. They have their own unique practices and regulations that influence the valuation process. For instance, just in the UK, there are several definitions of value depending on the charging provision, and each definition yields a different value. That is the point. So it's really important to work to the right definition to ensure the correct tax outcome. We have seen so many cases where failing to seek specialised tax valuation advice has led to individuals paying more tax than necessary.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. So, I mean, Lyndsay, what are your thoughts?
It isn't enough just to be a good valuer when you're operating in this world. A tax valuer needs really strong technical valuation skills and a really thorough understanding of the framework surrounding the valuation. Now, you might say, well, we have a good valuer and we have good tax advisors that can instruct them. Surely I'll get a good tax valuation. But that's not how it works. It's the expertise in the area which lies in between the two that can really deliver the differential quality for clients.
If only it was that simple.
Yeah, it's often the case that valuation is not a binary answer. A good valuer can see a real range of outcomes. They can weigh up lots of different evidence of value and use their judgment to conclude on an appropriate value which stands up to stakeholder scrutiny and has a long sell-by date.
Yeah, stakeholder scrutiny. I mean, let's dig in there a little bit. So you mentioned the scrutiny of different valuations. At Ledgy, we deal a lot with EMI valuations, 409A valuations that are sort of standard compliance requirements. You then might have valuations that come along as part of a sale, a business sale, or M&A, or a listing. The different valuation scenarios a company comes across. How do the pressures change in those different scenarios? And what's the key difference between, let's say, a dialogue with HMRC or a tax authority versus the same kind of conversation, but it's a counterparty in an acquisition? Where should a company really start?
Yeah, really good question, Joe. And you're right, there are differences. A tax authority, they will be scrutinising a valuation position several years after the relevant event. That will potentially be triggered by a tax inquiry or perhaps a subsequent event which crystallises some evidence of value. They'll be reviewing the valuation with the view to considering whether they can increase the tax take for the exchequer or potentially apply penalties in the case of non-compliance. We often tell our clients that we do two things. We tell them what a tax authority might say about a valuation, and then we help them to negotiate and agree those valuations with the relevant tax authority.
And as you suggest, Joe, the other key reviewer, and in many cases, the far more critical reviewer, will be an acquirer or their advisors. In many jurisdictions, the valuation of management equity has become a self-regulated system with valuations reviewed as part of a pre-deal due diligence. The acquirer will want to understand whether there are any red flags in their deal economics, and valuation and management equity issues are one of the most common reasons for amounts being held back in escrow and or price chips. For that reason, and given the fast changing nature of many companies in the lead up to a fundraising or an IPO, it's absolutely key that robust documentation is prepared defending the valuations that have been taken, not least because reviewers, tax authorities, or on diligence will have the benefit of hindsight.
Yeah, really interesting.
I would just echo that. We are called in to support due diligences on a weekly basis, and it's always the same story. Everyone is hurtling towards a transaction and a potential issue has been identified. Either management that have acquired shares at undervalue, or sometimes leavers that have been paid too much consideration for their shares. The buyer needs to know the potential exposure, and they use our advice and our analysis to agree a different position with the tax authority, sometimes to put substantial amounts into escrow, or in the worst cases, even the deal might fall over. And it's almost always the case that that position could have been avoided if upfront quality tax valuation advice had been sought.
So, I mean, there's a lot at stake here, clearly, and we know that valuations are an emotional issue as well. How can founders and leadership teams who put their lives and their work into building these companies that are being valued, how can they think about valuations objectively while acknowledging that there are always a bit of back and forth is required to get to the right valuation? In these kind of high stress situations, and in these pressure moments, like, what kind of advice do you habitually provide there?
That's such a good question. We're talking about valuations prepared for tax or accounting standards here. There are a lot of rules. They have to be performed to certain standards, and all of those standards involve some kind of hypothetical scenario with no real world equivalent. That's a really hard exercise for someone who is emotionally invested to perform. They find it so difficult to take a step back and to look objectively at a valuation from the perspective of a prudent market participant. That can mean valuing the business with a different data set to that available to the actual shareholders, the actual stakeholders, or thinking differently about company prospects, or interpreting share rights in a different manner from how you might naturally think commercially.
And really, that's why there's experts dedicated to this area, people that can take that objective look at value for tax and or accounting purposes. I guess if we were to give one bit of advice here, one takeaway, it would be to take third-party advice and to take it from someone good.
A valuable reminder, and I think it's been a really interesting reminder of the importance of taking quality valuation advice and some of the stresses and pressures that go into this process. So in 8 minutes, roughly 8 minutes, thank you both, Sue and Lyndsay. It was great to have you today.
Thank you.
You've been watching 8-Minute Equity from Ledgy. To learn more about making equity work for your company, you can go to ledgy.com. Thanks very much for watching.